Our webinar today, as we are focusing on recruiting with diversity in mind, we all know that a diverse workforce is proven to increase revenue, innovation, and workplace satisfaction. Now, our presenter will engage us on hiring related biases that do occur, how to access and retain a diverse talent pool, and how to foster an inclusive workplace and embrace diversity. You will also be provided with strategies for recruitment and tools for supporting a diverse workforce to help your organization reach its full potential. Our presenter today is Rachel Glover, and Rachel is a dynamic advocate for at-risk or marginalized communities and an experienced trainer and educator for public and private sector organizations, specializing in the areas of communication, diversity, inclusivity, respect in the workplace, sexuality, and other related topics. Rachel can facilitate difficult content, conversations in a comfortable way, allowing participants to understand and interact with the information provided. Thus, Rachel has the ability to create an environment of high engagement, which often results in a shift in mindset and create greater retention of the information delivered. So today, please help me welcome our speaker and our presenter today, Rachel Glover. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to share the presentation now. Perfect. And can everyone see the slide? Perfect. Thank you so much. So yes, thank you for that lovely introduction. My name is Rachel Glover. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Programming at STEM Consulting. And I'm really excited to be here today. I travel all around Canada, training people on a variety of different topics, on diversity and inclusion, 2S LGBTQ inclusion practices. I do a lot of work for Pride Month. I work with the disability community and people who are marginalized and at-risk communities as well. And I love the work that I do because I get to talk to folks from all different areas of Canada about how to be more welcoming, how to change our language and our practices to make sure everybody feels included and safe and welcomed and valued. And that's essentially what we're doing here today. So we're going to be discussing how we can diversify our workforces, how we can take bias out of the hiring process. And in order to do that, we do need to understand what bias is. So let's go through the agenda here. 1 second, beautiful. Perfect. So we will begin today by doing a quick overview on cultural diversity. So what is it? Some statistics for in Canada, just to get a better idea of the different people that we're working with and how diverse Canada is. We're then going to talk about the benefits of a diverse workforce. It sounds like we're all quite aware of all the wonderful benefits, but we will overview it. Maybe there are some things people weren't aware of. And as we probably know, there has been a ton of research on this. So these are proven benefits on lots of different research that has happened, and the findings have all been the same about these incredible benefits that happen when you have different people working together. We're also going to discuss bias during the hiring process. So what kind of bias can there be? What does that look like? And also how can we stop this bias from happening? So we're going to have some examples of how this may show up in the hiring process as well. From there, we're going to discuss equitable hiring practices. So if we know this bias can exist, what can we do to counteract that? So things we can do to make it more inclusive and equitable for the wide range of applicants we hope to have. And then we're going to wrap up our session by talking about what an inclusive workplace is, because it's one thing to reach out and have a really wide scope of a talent pool. You have people from all different cultures and ages and genders that are your applicants, which is one step. That's really great. And now you have made it really equitable and the hiring process and really fair. And you're making sure there's no bias, and we'll go through how you can do that. And now you've hired somebody that may be of a different culture. So what next? It's not that that journey is over. Now we're diverse. It's important to make sure everyone feels that they are welcomed, that they belong in your workplace, that they are valued. Because if people don't feel like they belong, that's usually when there's a high turnover. So it'll help you retain more staff when we have these inclusive workplaces, helps with team morale. There are also so many benefits. So we will wrap up our session today by discussing how to create these inclusive workplaces. And of course, we will have time for questions afterwards as well. Now, I want to start by doing a little activity. So I'm going to invite everyone to grab a pen and paper. So everyone's going to grab a pen and a paper. And this is a private activity, so you won't have to share this with anybody. And I want you to draw a line down the middle of the paper, kind of like so. And on the left side of that line, I want you to write the initials or the names of 6 to 10 people that you trust, but that are not your family members. So there's a little example there. On the left side, come up with 6 to 10 people that you trust who are not your family. And I'll give everybody 30 seconds. Okay, and we'll give 15 more seconds. Perfect. So for the time being with your list, you can just put it aside because we're going to return to it later. And for now, we're going to continue by discussing cultural diversity. So I want everyone, if you're comfortable to do so, to go into the chat and type in where you're from, what your background is. Mine, for example, I am English and German. So if you're comfortable to do so, I'd love for everyone to share, where they're from or where their family's from, what their backgrounds are into the chat. Lovely. I see Ukrainian, Hungarian, Swedish, Polish, Ukrainian, Hungarian, Irish, Scottish, Irish and Italian. Dakota Cree from Mosquito First Nation. Sorry, they're all coming in now. Métis Irish, First Nations, Woodland Cree Treaty 6, Cameroon. Beautiful. Thank you everyone for sharing. So as we can see, we're all from different parts of the world, different parts of Canada. We all have different backgrounds. And we come from different cultures, which is really important to note. Because when we come from different cultures, that means we've had different upbringings. We have different values, maybe different holidays, different religions, different beliefs, different mannerisms. When we come like different cultures, there's so many different aspects to that I don't think a lot of people are aware of how that can show up in our day-to-day lives. And if we're looking at Canada, 22.3% of the entire Canadian population identifies as a visible minority, and that was from the 2021 Canadian census. So that is a huge majority of Canadians that did identify as a visible minority. Now, Canada is seen as one of the most diverse and multicultural countries in the entire world. They did rank as 7, which was absolutely incredible. But we know that people do come from different cultures that don't identify as a visible minority. So 65.7% of the Canadian population identified as belonging to a European ethnic origin. So that could be, for example, British, French, Irish, Italian, German, etc. Whether they're born here or not, whether they identify as a visible minority or not, anybody that comes from a different culture will have different beliefs, will have, like I said, different mannerisms, different ways of interacting and interpreting the world. And this is one thing we really want to pay attention to in our day-to-day lives and in this session today, because when we're talking about creating these workplaces and hiring with this in mind, these cultural differences can show up in ways that we may not have realized. So cultural differences can show up in interactions. One example of that is through communication styles. So in some cultures, people tend to communicate indirectly using hints or gestures rather than directly stating their thoughts or feelings. So for example, in Japanese culture, it's considered impolite to say no directly. So people may say, it's difficult, or let me think about it instead. In contrast, in North American culture, people tend to communicate more directly and say no without hesitation. So can anybody maybe foresee why these cultural differences may show up in a workplace and may cause barriers even during a hiring process? Some people might make an assumption, if they're interviewing somebody and they aren't saying no or yes, they're kind of saying, oh, it's difficult to give, it's difficult to say, I'd have to think about it. If you're not aware of these cultural differences, some people might think, oh, well, they're not able to make a decision. They can't make firm decisions. They don't seem, to be confident or direct and assertive. However, this person could be the best candidate for the job. They are educated, they are talented, they are great at the work they do. It's just that their cultural differences lead them to having just a different way of interacting with people. And both ways are beautiful ways to interact with people. But if we're not aware of people's cultural differences, a lot of different misunderstandings can happen and maybe disagreements. And that's when sometimes assumptions can happen. Another communication style that can happen with different cultures is silence. So silence can have different meanings in different cultures. In some cultures, silence is seen as a sign of respect or thoughtfulness, while in others, it may be interpreted as awkwardness or discomfort. So if you're sitting with somebody and they're awfully quiet, and maybe, if someone from your culture, you are very, very, very chatty, sometimes we can see sometimes Italians, let's say from big Italian families, they might be loud and they might talk with their hands and they might be very chatty. Whereas somebody from a different culture may not, they might just be more quieter and reserved. And if those two people were having an interview, it could become maybe, to the very chatty person, it could feel really awkward and uncomfortable. For the person who's quiet, they might just think it's a lot. It's very overwhelming having this person with energy talking so much. And, they're both okay ways to interact with the world. We just have these different cultures that make us interact differently and in different styles. Perfect. Another way that different cultures can show up is through body language. And this can vary widely across different cultures. So for example, in Middle Eastern cultures, eye contact is seen as a sign of aggression or disrespect, while in Western cultures, lack of eye contact may be seen as like disrespectful or shyness or dishonesty. So if you were working with somebody, from a Middle Eastern culture, giving them eye contact while you're interacting with them, like I said, they can find that really disrespectful and aggressive. But in Western society, it can be seen as respectful. I'm looking at you because I'm showing you that I'm paying attention and I care about what you're saying. So that's another example of how this can happen. Another form of body language that can differ between cultures is the okay sign. So the okay sign is made by forming a circle with a thumb and index finger. Some people in different cultures can find that really offensive. While, typically in North American culture, it's saying like, okay, so it's a harmless gesture. But if we're not aware, again, of the different meanings and beliefs different cultures have, you might go around to people of different cultures in your workplace and say like, okay, and they'd be like, they might be offended by it. And we're going to talk about how to navigate these situations as we move forward. There are some other behaviors as well that I wanted to take note of. So different cultures have different expectations when it comes to personal space. In some cultures, people stand or sit very close to one another while speaking. And in other cultures, they maintain more distance. For example, in Latin American cultures, people tend to stand or sit very close to one another, while in Scandinavian cultures, people prefer more space. And I've had this situation come up in other groups I've worked with, where people, some people can be very uncomfortable with their team because their personal space is not being, respected. They just feel that people are in their personal space and it's uncomfortable for them. And it's just this different of cultures. And most of the time it's these open conversations. It's, learning about different cultures that people have, different behaviors and values and beliefs, and even talking to your coworkers, celebrating each other's different cultures, talk about these different mannerisms that people have, we like to be very close and we like to hug all the time when we see each other. We're very affectionate people. Or maybe you're not, but it's okay. It's okay and appropriate to ask questions, ask people about their cultures, share parts of your own, find that middle ground. So everyone feels that we're being respected. Nobody likes to feel uncomfortable or have, their boundaries pushed. So a lot of the time having these open conversations can make a world of a difference. Perfect. So let's discuss the benefits of a diverse workforce. So diversity is an important aspect of human society, and it helps to promote mutual respect, understanding, and cooperation between people from different backgrounds. By embracing cultural diversity, which just to be clear, cultural diversity is having a variety of different cultures in one group or one society. So those are people that can have different, as I mentioned, religious beliefs, holidays, events, different languages, different foods, different values, different ways that they grew up, different belief systems. Some people may have arranged marriage, some people may not. There's so many different ways that people can show their cultural differences. And cultural diversity is when we have a bunch of different cultures in one place, one group, or one society, which is Canada. Canada's very culturally diverse. Research has proven that there are undeniable benefits from having a diverse workplace. And one of those things that they found out is that there's an increase in creativity and innovation. So before I elaborate on this point, I am going to do a little activity with everyone. So I'm going to show you an image on the next slide. And in the chat box, I want you to type whatever it is you see. There is no right or wrong answer. I've heard actually a lot of different answers when I've shown this image. So you can just type out everything and anything that comes to you when you look at this image. Perfect. So I'll give everyone a second. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Just type out whatever it is that you see in this image. Perfect. I'm getting some answers. A lady's face, lady, woman and a saxophone player, man playing sax, the thinking process, sax player and a woman face. Absolutely. Perfect. A woman face and a sax player. Lovely. Thank you so much. So we all looked at the exact same image. Hehowever, there were different answers that came out. A lot of people did see, a lady or woman and a sax player. Sometimes I've heard like a waterfall before. Somebody told me of a mask, like the kind of like the theater mask where half is like white and half is black. And like I said, there's no right or wrong answer because it's our personal perceptions. We all have our own perception, and our perception is how we interpret and understand the world. So each and every single person has a different perception. We can all look at the same apple and see it differently. Somebody might say that's a red apple. Someone say it's more of a, maroon color and it has a leaf, and the side I'm looking at has a bite mark in it. But, someone on the other side of the apple wouldn't see the bite mark. We can all look at the exact same thing and experience it differently and see it differently. And the influence of our culture can play a big role in our perceptions and how we understand and interpret and experience things in the world. So let's say there is a problem and everybody in the work on your team at work had the same age, ethnicity, gender, religion, and education, you're not really going to come up with all these different ideas and solutions if you're all have these same experiences and life experiences. That's why it's so important to have a diverse workforce, is because when you have people that have had different upbringings, different experiences in life, different cultures, right? We have all of these differences. That's when people will be innovative and creative. They're going to bounce ideas off each other. Somebody will come up with something that somebody else may have never, ever even thought about. You'll have this beautiful brainstorming, and that's when you can do the best type of problem solving, come up with the next big idea, is when you do have different ideas coming together and working together. When we have these different perspectives, you have this problem at work. Well, people on a diverse team, they're all looking at the same problem, but they're going to be able to see it differently and see different solutions and, different avenues that you can take. Perfect. So diversity is a key driver of innovation and is a critical component of being successful on a global scale as well. So our next topic here is better decision making. So similar to how we said, we have all these different perspectives that can problem solve. And also, when you have a diverse team, you'll have these different insights. It's going to be leading to more balanced, informed, and successful decisions, because you really are getting a wide range of ideas. You'll be able to really pick the ones that would work best. And when other people, you might suggest something and that could give somebody else an idea, then it'll keep growing and growing. And there was actually a study that was done on this. So Clover Pop, which is an online decision-making platform, they examined 600 different businesses, different business decisions that were made by 200 teams. And they found that the diverse teams have a 60% improvement in decision-making compared to the non-diverse teams, which is a huge difference. So teams that are diverse will be 60% more successful than ones that are not. That's pretty incredible. Another benefit of a diverse workforce are higher profits. So the Harvard Business Review found that more diverse companies reported 19% higher revenue. So the more diverse if you have a diverse company, you're going to have 19% more revenue than companies that are not diverse. And a McKinsey report stated that every 10% increase in the racial and ethnic diversity of a business leads to a 0.8% increase in earnings. So I know that was a lot of statistics, but again, it's just saying the more diverse and inclusive your workplace is, the more you're going to make, the higher your revenue will be, the more successful your business will be. And again, a lot of research has been done on this. It is proven. Another benefit to a diverse workforce is increased talent pool. So a diverse workforce can attract a wider range of talent from different backgrounds, leading to a more qualified and skilled workforce. According to a Glassdoor survey, 72% of women, 89% of Black respondents, 80% of Asians, and 70% of Latinos said workforce diversity was important to them. So it's not only that you want to attract diversity when you're hiring, so you can have this diverse workforce and you can have this great innovative team and be successful. People won't necessarily want to go to a workplace that is not diverse already. So that's what these findings are saying. People pay attention to that and kind of look around. And if they don't maybe see themselves represented in your workplace, if they don't see any representation, nobody else there that it looks like them or identifies as them, they're less likely to take the job or want to work there. So that really matters as well. Also, if people tend to be hiring the same person over and over again, you're missing out on great talent that you haven't looked for before. So if you're finding that when you're putting out a job, you're getting similar applicants, even if it's the same gender of applicants or same ethnicity or same age, you need to expand where you're posting your jobs, because there are so many different markets that you're missing out on of talented, skilled people that could be the best thing that ever happened to your company. So even when you're recruiting, pay attention to what kind of applications you're getting in, pay attention to what platforms you're posting your jobs on, and there's plenty of other different places that you can post your jobs if you want a wider range of applicants that are still skilled and talented and meet all your qualifications. Perfect. Oh, perfect. Yes. And then we have increased competitiveness. So when you have a diverse workforce, you can better understand and serve a diverse customer base, leading to increased customer satisfaction and loyalty. It can also give an organization a competitive advantage by better reflecting the diverse markets it serves. So you're going to attract a wider range of customers and clients and be able to support them better. Can anybody think of any other benefits that there might be to a diverse workforce? I'll wait a second in the chat. So these were 5, but there are so many. Can anybody think of any other benefits to having a diverse workforce? Go. I don't know if I can see the chat option. So Tamika, oh, there we go. Perfect. The whole chat option to even view it went missing on me. Increased retention. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So increased retention, people will want to stay at your company when they feel, like I said, if it's a diverse company, people will want to join, people will want to stay when they feel like they're being included and valued and celebrated. There will be lower turnover. There's going to be higher employee morale. So employees who feel that their workplace values and respects their diversity are more likely to feel motivated, engaged, and committed to their work. When people feel respected, they're also inclined to learn about other people and respect other people as well. It's this beautiful domino effect of, once you feel included, you'll include others, and you create this really beautiful workplace. What I had listed on the board there, it's really kind of the business case for a diverse workforce, but it's also the right thing to do. People should have equal opportunity. People should be represented in businesses. And we're going to talk on the next slide about why this doesn't happen, because there is a bias that occurs. Everybody has a bias. So it's really interesting why this isn't happening already. So it can also, having a diverse workforce can also increase the well-being of team members. It creates this openness, this authenticity. People will have increased personal confidence, increased trust. They'll increase their engagement. They'll have greater collaboration amongst team members. When people feel that they belong in their workplace, they are taking less sick days. They're more dedicated to the work. They're more passionate about their work. So there's all of these really incredible and wonderful benefits. So we are going to talk about bias. Perfect. Here we go. So bias is the action of supporting or opposing a particular person or thing in an unfair way because of allowing personal opinions to influence your judgment. So it refers to the tendency to hold a preference or a prejudice in favor or against someone or a person or a group or a thing based on certain characteristics such as race, gender, age, or cultural background. And this can result in the unfair treatment or judgment and can negatively impact individuals or groups who are targeted by such biases. So we're not always aware of our bias. That's called the subconscious bias. So each and every single person, everyone in the world has a bias. Whatever it is, we all have a bias. I am going to share a resource with you at the end of the session when we're doing the Q&A. So it's a test that Harvard offers. And it's a test if you have any bias towards certain groups of people. So you can even choose the group of people. They'll have a whole list of different demographics and diversity. And you can choose, and you fill out this little form they have, and it'll tell you if you have a tendency to be biased towards this group or not. They have one on, elderly people, people with disabilities, people of different racial backgrounds, gender. And I really think it's a very impactful and powerful experiment that everyone should do, because you might be surprised about what you find out. And even though you think you're, super inclusive and everyone's welcome, and I have this big heart and I would never be biased against anybody, sometimes we are not even aware of our bias. And this is for a few reasons. We have bias because of socialization. So how we were raised. From the second we were born, we were raised in a world that told us, what is right and what is wrong. For example, a gender bias. You learned what a woman is maybe supposed to be like and what a man is supposed to be like. And it's kind of these two groups. There's a proper way of doing it. There's a wrong way. And it's reinforced all around you every second of your life, even today, even this moment. It's in the media, in the movies, it may be in your family, in the when you're walking down a street, advertisements, everywhere you look, we can have some of these stereotypes just fed back to us. And that's kind of our socialization, and it can be ingrained very deeply. So sometimes when we have this unconscious bias, so we're not even aware of it, it's because it's so ingrained in us that it's hard to see sometimes. Another reason that people may have a bias is because of personal experiences. So people's personal experience can shape their beliefs and attitudes towards a certain group of people. Maybe you had a negative experience with an individual from a certain group. And now you might kind of jump to conclusions and think everyone from that group you're going to have that same bad experience over and over and over again. So now, just because you had one bad experience, you're now judging an entire group of people based on that one experience. And that can also happen because of the way our minds work. Our minds are always taking in a ton of information, always, every second, right now, everything around you. You're looking, you're observing, you're taking this in. So our brains make these little shortcuts to make, interacting in the world much more easier. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're walking in the woods or in a park, and at the bottom of your eye, you can see a snake walk across the path. Are you going to stop, look down, observe, think of how to react, and then back away? Or does the second your mind, the second you see it in the corner of your eye, is your body just going to immediately jump out of the way? Like, oh, it's a snake. It's these immediate reactions that we may not even be aware of, and then you might look down and be like, oh, haha, it was just a stick. It wasn't a snake. Sometimes we're not even right, but our bodies, our minds have these beliefs, and our brains will make these little shortcuts and go right to them. And that's how bias can happen too. It's when you see somebody and your mind jumps and attaches all these assumptions based on that person that in reality are not real, right? Everyone's an individual. Everybody is different. We can't label one group as something. So that's kind of a little bit of where bias can come from and how it happens. So that being said, we are going to return back to that page that I got everyone to do, the beginning activity. Again, this is private, it's just for yourself, but I am going to read out some dimensions of diversity, and I want you to put a check mark beside those members on the trusted circle if they have that same dimension as you. So let me give you an example. If I say gender, so if anybody on my list is female, because I'm a female, so they have the same gender as me, you're going to put a check mark beside their name if they have that same identity as you do. Does that make sense to everybody? All good? Perfect. So we'll start with gender. So put a check mark beside any person on your list that has the same gender as you. Perfect. And put a check mark beside anybody that has the same nationality as you. Put a check mark beside anybody that has the same language as you. Put a check mark beside anybody that has the same, who's in the same generation as you or same age group as you. And I want to make sure I'm not rushing anybody if you have a list of 10. I want you to put a check mark beside somebody who has the same race or ethnicity as you. And put a check mark beside somebody who has the same religion as you. Ooh, there we go. And put a check mark beside somebody who has the same sexual orientation as you. And the final one, put a check mark beside somebody who has the same ability or disability as you. So if you have a disability, put a check mark beside people who have the same disability as you. If you don't have a disability, put a check mark beside people who also do not have a disability. Okay. So what do you notice? What do you notice about your circle of trust? Are the majority of people in your trusted circle similar to you? I'm going to run a little poll. So it's an anonymous poll. Here we go. And I'd like to know, are the majority of members in your trusted circle similar to you? Perfect. We'll just wait for a few more responses. All right. So 90% of people said yes. Yes, the members in my trusted circle are similar to me. We had 10% that said no, they are not. And I love to use this example. Thank you all, by the way, for participating. Because your inner circle will often include people that have backgrounds that are similar to you, because people have this tendency to preference or to like prefer people who are like ourselves. We get along easier with them, right? The communication, the personalities. If people are similar to us, it's easier to get along with them. So it's called an affinity, or another word is called the in-group, and it is a bias, and it is also well researched. So studies show that in general, people extend not only the greatest trust, but also greater positive thoughts, cooperation, and empathy to in-group members. So to other people that have the same identities as you, you're more likely to trust them, even without knowing them. You're more likely to have this good feeling about them because you recognize yourself in them. And this preference towards people that are similar to us, it's largely instinctive and unconscious. You may not think, I'm curious if that activity we just did made you be like, oh my gosh, I never realized that. But yeah, wow, my inner circle are people like that are very similar to me. Maybe not in personality wise, but in identities and the way we in our culture, in our values, in our backgrounds, we don't have a lot of maybe diversity even in our personal lives. And this can manifest in a lot of different ways, especially in ways where we not only prefer people that are on the in-group or similar to us, but that can also show up as having an aversive tendency towards out-group members, meaning you might not really want to warm up to people who aren't similar to you. You might be less likely, you might be less trusting, less warm because they're less familiar to you. So can anybody think how this can impact people in the workplace or when it comes to hiring? It does suggest that people are more likely to hire people that they recognize themselves in, that they have those similar traits, so similar demographics. And again, this is a subconscious thing. People may not even realize they're doing it. And that's also when you look around and you see no diversity in a workplace. It's because people keep hiring somebody and they might think, oh, I have a good feeling about this person for some reason. Yeah, because, they look and sound like you and they have the same education as you. And, all of these reasons can happen. So it's really important to be aware of the bias that we may have, because all of this, again, can be completely subconscious. People may have never realized it, but you can change this. So unless you're intentionally reflecting on your own values, culture, preferences, and bias, you won't ever be aware of the inequalities that you're enforcing yourself. So self-reflection is always a great thing. So let's discuss bias in the hiring process. We were all able to maybe identify our own kind of bias. I will share that that test that Harvard offers for free online. I'll share that at the end, and I invite everyone to take it. It's really thought-provoking. But let's discuss some of the bias that can happen in a hiring process. Age. There is a bias against age, and that is when an employer makes assumptions or stereotypes about a candidate's age, leading to unfair treatment. For example, assuming that older candidates may not be as technologically savvy as younger candidates, or assuming older applicants are going to retire soon, so you don't want to hire them. You never want to make these assumptions. You can interview them and find out, if you have a job where they have to be, technologically savvy, talk to them about that, ask them about their qualifications. But sometimes people just get a resume and, sometimes they'll look at the age, at the year that they graduated high school, and they'll make an assumption about how old they are. And then maybe not even bring them in for an interview because of all of this prejudice that happens, this bias against people who are older. The same can happen for people that are younger. They might just think, well, they're not qualified enough. They haven't had enough experience yet. They won't really benefit our team. They're too young. Again, that's a bias. That is a bias against young people. That's not because you've met this person, you've learned about their qualifications, and you've discovered for your own eye in front of yourself that they weren't qualified. You're making these assumptions based on their age. And that is a bias that happens very often in the hiring process. There's also racial bias that occurs when people are making, or when an employer is making assumptions and stereotypes about a candidate's race, leading to unfair treatment. So that would be assuming that candidates from certain racial backgrounds may not have the necessary qualifications or work ethic. And I wanted to share some really interesting research that the University of Toronto and Ryerson did. So what they did is they wanted to investigate interview callback rates. So when people send in all of their resumes, they wanted to do some research on the callback, who's getting the calls for an interview. So what they did is they invented almost 13,000 resumes. They made these resumes up, totally fake resumes. And they would put like Anglo names on them, English names on some, and they'd put Asian names on some. And the exact same qualifications, like identical resumes. All they did was change the name at the top. And the findings were disturbing is an understatement. So the research showed that Asian named applicants are less likely than Anglo named job seekers to be selected for an interview, even when they had identical resumes. And the statistics were that the Asian named applicants that had the same exact Canadian qualifications had 20% less callbacks. The only difference was that their name was an Asian name. That was it. Everything was the exact same. And they received 20% less callbacks just because of their name. And if they had, and that's for large organizations. So large organizations, they received 20% less calls. If they applied to a medium-sized or smaller business, they would receive 40% less callbacks. And again, this is the exact same resume. So if this doesn't show exactly how racial bias can show up, even just by looking at somebody's resume, these biases occur and people may not be aware, but they're making these split decisions that are completely unfair and inequitable. And that's just one small example. There's also a disability bias. So that occurs when people make stereotypes about people with disabilities, leading to unfair treatment. So it's assuming that somebody with a disability won't be able to perform certain job duties. And there's a huge bias and discrimination against people with disabilities. Think about yourselves in your workplace. Have you ever hired one? Is there somebody with a disability on your team? Have you made any accommodations to be accessible to people with disabilities if they were to come to your business or come on your team. You know, when people post a job ad, sometimes they say we're inclusive, you know, we're open to all different applicants, regardless of race, you know, gender, sexual orientation, accommodations can be made. That's not good enough, saying accommodations can be made, because that is, that thing will be reactive. Like, you let us know if you need anything and we'll try to figure it out. If you're posting a job ad, you should say what accommodations you are going to make. You should say, you know, we can have an interpreter come if you are, you know, deaf and you require some sign language. You know, we do have ramps, we have an accessible building to be more inclusive to people who are blind. You can type out, you can give a description of what it's like to enter your building, where the front doors are, how many steps to the elevator. So when that blind person comes for the interview, they already know what to expect in the physical layout, and they'll be able to access that more clearly. When you're not doing any of these accommodations or helping, you know, or being accessible to people with disabilities, essentially what you're saying is that people with disabilities are not welcome here. There's also an educational bias. So that's when people only want to hire other people that have maybe come from the same university as them, or they only want a really well-known schooling only. Whereas, you know, there are candidates that with degrees from different places or have different experience that isn't through education, and they could still be the best applicant for the job. And next, gender. So there is a gender bias when people are hiring. And it's when people make unfair assumptions about someone's gender. So assuming women may not be as committed to their careers as men because they can become pregnant. And I wanted to share some research that was done again. So Harvard in 1980 wanted to do a research on orchestras, musical orchestras. It was largely dominated by men. There was only men on these orchestras. So they wanted to do some research to find out why. And what they did is they started running some interviews, right? So musicians would come on stage and play for the conductors, and they'd either be selected or not. So in this research, what they did is they closed the blinds. They closed the curtains. So the conductors would not be able to see the gender of the musician. And again, the results were wild. Oh, sorry, right here. I was going to show a short video, but I know we don't quite have the time for it. But again, I can send everybody a link to some of these resources for afterwards. So it used to be, the orchestras used to be completely dominated by men, and it's almost half female today because of these findings. They found that 30% more women were hired as musicians. So there was an incredible bias happening where they were just choosing male musicians because of their own bias. And as soon as they closed the curtains and they couldn't see the gender, it became much more fair, much more equitable. And again, they may not even realize it. They probably thought, well, the men are the better musicians. No, that's again, some bias, some deep rooted bias that has been reinforced to them their whole life, that they didn't realize that they were being inequitable. So how do we reduce bias in the hiring process? I want to make sure, okay, we're going to go through this one. We're going to go through this slide. We did start a little bit later. So what I will do is I will share with everybody afterwards how to create the inclusive workplace. So we'll go through this slide and then we'll open it up for questions, just so I don't keep you past your time, if that works for everybody else. So how do we reduce bias in the hiring process? So for starters, just like that example I just shared, blind hiring practices, kind of like closing the curtains so you can't see the gender of the musician, and that way you'll be more fair. Take away any identifiable information from somebody's resume. That can be their name, because remember the example I gave, if somebody had an Asian name, they were 20 to 40% less likely to even be called, even though they had the same qualifications. You may not be aware of your own bias, so take the name out of people's resumes before you're looking through them, or get, somebody from HR to do that. These are called the kind of blind hiring practices. Take away their age, their gender, again, their name, their educational background. This can help reduce biases related to these factors, and it will promote more equitable hiring. You never want to make assumptions. One example is that if someone has a gap in their resume, A lot of people will frown upon that and be like, oh, they didn't work for a while. We don't want to make those assumptions. We have no idea what happened in that time. They could be a newcomer to Canada. They could be on maternity or paternity leave. They could have been helping some ill family members. Maybe they were ill themselves or injured. So we never want to assume what happened, what somebody's story is just by seeing maybe a gap in their resume. We can use objective criteria. So, have an evaluator, something you check off. What's important for this role? Before you're interviewing anybody, what would be a successful applicant's skills? And then use this when people are interviewing. So you can't just say, oh, I got a good feeling. I got a good feeling from them, right? Because they may be similar to yourself. Good feelings don't matter. We're looking for the skilled and qualified applicant. So using an objective criteria method can help you reduce any type of bias that can happen in the interview process. Diversify the hiring teams. So if you have a team that is interviewing people, make sure that that team is diverse, that they're different ages or genders or races or religions or ethnicities. Just have people that are doing the hiring be from different cultures so you can have a more balanced and equitable hiring process. You can provide training. So doing diversity and inclusion training, cultural sensitivity training, educating your staff on the different cultures, kind of like you learned about some of the differences today with communication and body language. Being aware of these things can really make a difference. You can also monitor and evaluate how you are doing. Right now, look at people in your business. How diverse is it? How many different, cultures and ages and religions and sexual orientations do you have on your staff? Find the gaps, try to fill them and monitor it. See how many different resumes you get in that are diverse. See how many people you are interviewing. If you notice you're only interviewing people of one different age or race, you can say, wow, that's a problem. I'm going to go out of my way now to make sure I'm finding a more diverse talent pool. And as I mentioned, we can learn about the different cultures because that can stop any bias that is happening during the hiring process. Ask people, if you have diverse people on your team, ask them to tell you about their culture, share your culture with them, promote it, right? We can share it with everybody, invite these open conversations that celebrate our differences. And we can reflect and explore our own culture, values, and bias, because as we know, we all have bias. So even by being aware of your own, you'll be able to be more in control of not letting that come into the workplace or into your hiring practices. And that being said, I will let us open it up for questions now, because I know we are at the end of our session. Perfect. And maybe while people are, because I see we don't have any quite yet. While questions come up, because we have a few more minutes, I will go through the next slide till a question comes up, because we just had one slide that we didn't get to. So I really wanted to share how to create inclusive workplaces. So it's one thing to hire a diverse team, but it's essential that people feel like they belong and are welcomed and valued. So this is what happens when you have an inclusive workplace, because it's like I said, you're hiring diverse people, but then they come to your workplace and maybe they don't feel included or like they belong or like they're an outsider. That's not a nice feeling. Nobody deserves to feel like that. So we can counteract that by creating an inclusive workplace. So you can do this by fostering an inclusive culture, which means promoting open communication, respect, empathy among all employees, encourage employees to share their experiences and perspectives, provide opportunities for employees to connect and build relationships. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Having some policies. So having a diversity and inclusion policy that is public to everybody. There we go. Being public about your commitment to diversity and inclusion and making sure everyone feels safe and welcomed and seen and valued. We can also provide training, as I mentioned before, training your staff on cultural sensitivity, about the different cultures, about diversity, about inclusion. Ensure that there are equal opportunities for all people. So that's opportunities for growth, development, advancement. You can develop and implement policies and procedures that promote equal pay, equitable promotion, and opportunities for professional development. You can provide accommodations for employees with disabilities or other special needs to ensure that they can fully participate in the workplace. We already talked about having that in your job description. making accommodations for religious holidays or language barriers. We can get interpreters. You can take time off for Yom Kippur, whatever it may be. Celebrate diversity, Black History Month, Pride Month, Ramadan, being public about these celebrations and being accommodating when people need to do certain things to be able to celebrate appropriately, and be a role model. Be the example in your organization. Let them see the commitment to diversity and inclusion, and invite these open conversations about bias and cultures and inclusion, and making sure that everyone has a voice and everyone does feel included. And by asking about people's cultures and celebrating them, again, it's going to be this domino effect of everyone on your team seeing this and becoming involved. And in that way, you can truly create an inclusive workplace where everyone will be supported. And through that, you will now have this great innovation and teamwork, all those beautiful things that we had talked about that comes with a diverse workplace. So thank you all for bearing with me. I think we did go a minute over.
No worries. Maybe just one question. Rachel, what's the easiest quantifiable, maybe tangible step that an organization can take towards diversity in the workplace? The easiest way to start?
The easiest way to start is by knowledge and awareness. You don't even have to hire a trainer to come in. There's so much important information online. Start, sharing information with your staff, whether it's in an email you can send to all staff. Hey, it's important to us to be more inclusive. We're going to start talking about different cultures. Even if those cultures aren't on your team, just start sharing information about the beautiful differences that people have. That is free. That is something you start immediately. You can even ask your staff, would anybody like to share something about their culture or talk about it? Get them involved. Voluntary basis, right? We don't want to put anyone on the spot. Maybe start by sharing your own. So having some of these initiatives, just by having this open conversation and communication, staying present, don't stop this. Have it maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month, share a new experience or someone's culture, or, and if people might be a little shy to share, try to have those one-on-one conversations and promote them and say, I think that's incredible. Would you feel comfortable if we shared that with the whole team? The kind of events, or, a little, how you grew up and what your family was like and the kind of dinners you would have. Some people may have big dinners, other people may not have. Just learning any part about different people can create this beautiful connection and, team. It just can go so far, and that is free, and you can start doing it immediately. Just being publicly celebrating the diversity that this world has.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And that's a big part of team building as well. So you actually touched on something that is readily available, and it's right there in the workplace that can be done. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us again. Great presentation, Rachel. People have really been enjoying the presentation and the information shared. And just want to let all those attendants know that Tourism Saskatchewan is very proud to host these forms of webinars to really educate, and so that you are able to take actions as you see fit.